In the quiet hours before dawn, an undercover CEO discovers his most hard-working employee slicing meat alone at 3 a.m., but what begins as curiosity soon unravels into a shocking truth: a destroyed career, years of hidden injustice, and a woman silently preparing the ultimate revenge. This is the story of Chef Keisha Williams. The restaurant was silent at 3 a.m., the kind of silence that makes every small sound feel larger, sharper, impossible to ignore. A single fluorescent light flickered above the prep station as David Mitchell, wearing an oversized janitor's uniform and pushing a squeaky cleaning cart, stood hidden behind the cracked kitchen door. In that sliver of space, he watched a woman work with a level of skill he had rarely seen. Even in the finest kitchens he had toured as CEO, Keisha Williams bent over the cutting board with the focus of a surgeon. Each slice of her knife was clean, identical, almost musical in its precision. 50 pounds of beef lay before her, yet she moved as if she were performing a delicate craft rather than a grueling task. Her shoulders were tense, her breath steady but heavy, and every so often she wiped a bead of sweat from her brow with the back of her glove. Never breaking rhythm. David had spent 6 months undercover in his own restaurant chain to understand why turnover, complaints, and employee dissatisfaction had been rising. But nothing he'd seen so far matched the intensity of what he was witnessing now: the quiet pain, the exhaustion that looked too old for a woman in her 30s, the perfection that came from someone who had been forced to become flawless. Something wasn't right. Nobody prepped lunch meat at 3 in the morning. Nobody worked alone at this hour unless they were hiding from something or someone. And no one with this much natural talent should be stuck cutting meat in the back of a Cleveland kitchen. Keisha paused only for a moment, letting the knife hover above the cutting board as she closed her eyes. David saw the weight behind that brief stillness, like she was carrying far more than the load of meat in front of her. When her eyes opened again, they were sharper, more alert, as if she sensed she wasn't alone. She turned her head slightly, and her gaze landed right on him. For half a second, David froze. Her stare wasn't surprised, it was knowing. He fumbled with his cleaning supplies, pretending he had only just entered. She spoke without breaking eye contact. "Dave, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to clean until 4. He forced a smile, pushing the cart forward as casually as he could. "Can ask me to start early today." The lie felt flimsy, but it was the only explanation he had. Keisha turned back to the meat, though her movements were now tighter, guarded. "Someone has to prep this before lunch," she said, her tone flat. "Kun doesn't like it when I leave things for later." David already knew this wasn't true. The morning shift handled prep. Whatever this was, it wasn't protocol, it was punishment. He wiped a spotless counter beside her just to keep close. "Kun seems demanding," he said carefully. "He was yelling at Tamara yesterday. Something about a reservation." Keisha's grip on the knife tightened. "Tamara didn't forget anything," she said quietly but firmly. "He just wanted a reason." Her words slipped into the air like a confession she'd been holding back for too long. David felt a cold shiver down his spine. Something inside this restaurant was rotten, and every instinct told him she knew exactly what it was. After a moment, she set the knife down and leaned slightly over the table, her voice softer, more personal than before. "Can I ask you something, Dave?" She didn't wait for approval. "Have you ever had a dream someone stole from you?" The question hit him like a sudden drop. This wasn't random. This was the doorway into something buried deep. He nodded slowly. "Why do you ask?" She gave him a smile with no warmth in it, the kind of smile that comes from a person who has lived through something they still can't fully speak aloud. "Because tomorrow," she said, "some people are going to find out that messing with the wrong person has consequences." Her knife resumed its pattern, sharper now, angrier. David hesitated, then asked, "What happened to you, Keisha?" She didn't look at him when she answered. "You want to know about stolen dreams? Then listen," she exhaled, steadying herself. 5 years ago, I wasn't cutting meat in the back of a chain restaurant. I was Chef Keisha Williams, the youngest sous chef in Cleveland's most exclusive restaurant, Meridian Heights. She said it plainly, without pride, as if the title had become a painful memory rather than an achievement. I worked 80 hours a week, built menus, won awards. I earned my place. Her blade slowed as she continued. And then Robert Kun destroyed it. David's brows tightened. Kun, she nodded once. He was the manager at Meridian back then. He liked giving me special attention. Drinks after shifts, comments about my food, and about me. Her jaw clenched. The night I told him no, the money disappeared. $3,000. He planted it. Called the police before I even knew what was happening. David felt sick. You were framed. She finally looked at him again, eyes burning with a pain that had never healed. I was arrested, fired, blacklisted. One accusation was enough to erase 6 years of work. She returned to slicing the beef, each cut sharper than the last. And guess who got promoted for cleaning up theft and transferred here to run this place? David didn't answer. He didn't need to. Can ruin my career, she said quietly. Now I'm here. Because sometimes the best way to destroy an enemy is to stay close enough to watch them fall. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. And David realized he had severely underestimated the woman in front of him. Keisha didn't speak for several seconds after her confession, as if the memory itself needed space to breathe before she dragged it into the open. The kitchen's hum filled the silence, the refrigerator's low vibration, the soft drip from a faucet no one had bothered to fix, the faint buzz of the lone fluorescent light above them. David stood perfectly still, sensing that whatever she said next would not only explain her past but unravel the truth behind the entire restaurant's decay. Finally, she set the knife down, wiped her hands on her apron, and leaned back against the counter, her expression flat with the heaviness of someone who had carried a story too long without a witness. It didn't happen all at once. She began. Kun didn't just wake up one morning and decide to ruin my life. It was slow, calculated. First the compliments, then the long stares, then the little favors he claimed I owed him for. At first, I ignored it. I was focused on my craft. I thought if I just stayed professional, he would too. She let out a short, humorless breath. I was wrong. The night he tried to corner me in the storage room at Meridian Heights, when I pushed him away and told him to keep his hands off me, I knew he'd retaliate. I just didn't know how far he would go. David felt his jaw tighten. Keisha's voice remained calm, steady, almost emotionless, as if detachment was the only way she could survive retelling it. 2 nights later, she continued. $3,000 disappeared from the restaurant's safe. Security footage somehow went missing, and guess whose locker the money was found in? She let the question hang. David didn't answer. He didn't need to. The injustice pressed against him like a weight. I told them the truth, she said quietly. I begged them to check real security records. I asked for an investigation. But when a manager and a woman like me stand in front of a board full of men who already think they know the truth, only one of us ever gets believed. Her eyes hardened. I was handcuffed right there in the kitchen. The staff I trained wouldn't look at me. My name was on every industry watch list within 48 hours. No one hires a thief, especially not a black woman accused of stealing from a luxury restaurant. She folded her arms across her chest, the tension visible in her shoulders. Everything I worked for died in a single week. David swallowed, feeling a sting of guilt he couldn't entirely explain. He knew discrimination existed in the corporation, but he had never seen its effects this raw, this personal. Kun's been doing this longer than you think, Keisha went on, her voice tightening. It wasn't just me. You think it's a coincidence that every complaint filed in the past 4 years came from women or people of color. You think it's an accident that his shifts have the highest turnover, or that kitchen injuries tripled after he started managing here. She shook her head. He doesn't just destroy careers. He targets people he thinks won't fight back. David felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had seen the reports, the numbers, the spikes in HR complaints, but he had rationalized them, assuming mismanagement or undertrained staff. Hearing the truth spoken aloud made the pattern undeniable. You stayed here, he said slowly. After everything he did to you, you stayed. Her lips curved into a small, steely smile. People like Kun don't fall on their own. Someone has to push. She reached into a small storage cubby under the counter and pulled out a worn, black notebook. She held it up between them, tapping the cover lightly. 5 years, she said. 5 years of recordings, incident logs, statements from former employees, screenshots of messages he thought he erased, photos of injuries caused by his negligence, voice memos of him admitting things he shouldn't have said out loud. She opened the book, revealing pages thick with papers, timestamps, printed emails, handwritten notes, and that's just the physical stuff. The digital folder is even worse. David stared at the evidence, stunned. "Why are you showing this to me?" he asked, though part of him suspected the answer even before the question left his mouth. Keisha closed the notebook with a decisive snap. "Because I know who you are." She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "David Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Dining Group. You walk like a man used to being listened to. You don't talk like a janitor. And you sure as hell don't belong in that uniform." Her tone wasn't angry, it was challenging, sharp as a blade. "I noticed the first day you arrived. I wasn't sure at first, but then you flinched when Ken barked orders at you. Managers don't scare CEOs. Abusive men scare people with something to hide." David opened his mouth to respond, but she raised a hand, silencing him. "I didn't expose you earlier because I needed to know what kind of man you were," she said. "I needed to know if you were part of the problem, or if you might actually do something about it." She stepped closer, her voice lowering. "So here's the real question, David Mitchell, the one that decides everything." Her eyes locked onto his with a steady, unblinking intensity. "Now that you know the truth, are you going to help me bring Ken down? Or are you going to cover it up like every other executive before you?" The staff meeting was scheduled for 7 in the morning, long before customers arrived, long before the world outside even stirred. Most employees filed into the cramped dining room reluctantly, whispering among themselves with nervous glances. Whenever Ken called an unscheduled meeting, it usually meant someone was about to lose their job, someone who looked like them, sounded like them, or refused to play by his twisted rules. He stood at the front of the room now, arms crossed, a self-satisfied smirk on his face as if he were about to deliver a speech he had practiced in the mirror. David stood near the back in his janitor uniform, watching the tension tighten around the room like a storm cloud ready to burst. Keisha walked in last, her expression unreadable, but her step steady, purposeful, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. Ken cleared his throat dramatically. "Thank you all for coming. I'll make this simple," he said, tapping the clipboard in his hand. "We've had many inefficiencies lately, and corporate wants cuts. So, today, a few of you will be let go effective immediately." A hush fell across the room, thick with dread. Ken scanned the employees slowly, his gaze pausing a beat too long on the Latino line cook, the Somali dishwasher, the 2 black servers standing near the exit. It wasn't random. It never was. Keisha took a step forward. "Before you start reading off names," she said calmly, "I think we should add something to the agenda." Ken rolled his eyes. "This isn't a suggestion box, Keisha. If you have an issue, you bring it to me privately." She cut him off with a sharp, cold voice. "This isn't private anymore." A ripple of shock moved through the room as she pulled a folded document from her apron and read aloud the civil rights case number printed at the top. CR 2187B. United States Department of Justice. Workplace discrimination inquiry. Ken stiffened. His smirk disappeared. "What the hell is this?" She laid the paper flat on a table. "This," she said, "is the case I filed against you, and today. Everyone here is going to hear exactly why." Laughter burst from Ken, forced, jittery, the laugh of a man who suddenly feels the ground slipping beneath him. "You filed a case. On what grounds?" Keisha's voice was ice. "On the grounds that you're a predator, a racist, and a fraud." Gasps spread through the employees like sparks. Before Ken could bark back, the door swung open. A tall man in a tailored suit walked in, carrying a briefcase so full it looked ready to burst. Marcus Hale, employment lawyer, civil rights specialist, and Keisha's oldest friend. He didn't announce himself. He simply stepped forward, placed his credentials on the nearest table, and opened the briefcase so the thick stack of documents inside was visible to everyone. Kun's eyes widened. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus answered without looking at him. "The man representing half the people you've tried to fire." He handed several employees copies of their own HR reports, modified, falsified, rewritten in Kun's handwriting. "We have 12 altered termination files," Marcus said. 7 payroll discrepancies. 4 denied injury claims. "And that's just from the last 18 months. Whispers erupted among the staff, but they quickly faded when Keisha reached into her notebook and pulled out a small device. She pressed a button. A recording filled the room, clear and unmistakable. Kun's voice snarling insults, mocking accents, insulting employees for the color of their skin. The room fell into horrified silence. Another recording played, this one of him bragging about framing Keisha at her old job. His exact words echoed through the air like a death sentence. "She should have known better than to say no to me. I made sure she'd never work fine dining again." Employees stared at him with disgust, betrayal, and fury. Kun lunged forward, slamming his hand on the table. "Turn that off. Those recordings are illegal. This is harassment." David stepped forward then, removing the janitor's hat from his head and letting it fall to the floor. The room froze. The disguise slipped away with a single motion, revealing the posture, tone, and authority of a man no one expected to see here. "They're not illegal," David said calmly. "They were gathered during a corporate investigation." "My investigation?" Every eye turned toward him, employees stunned. Marcus unsurprised, Kun suddenly pale. David walked toward the front of the room, meeting Kun's glare with quiet, immovable authority. "I've been undercover for months after noticing a pattern of complaints, and now I see exactly where the rot is coming from," Kun sputtered, his voice cracking. You set me up. You, all of you, this is a scam." David shook his head. "The only scam here is the one you've been running. The fake terminations, the fabricated theft reports, the altered books." Marcus lifted another folder, and the fraudulent vendor invoices totaling $76,000. The weight of the accusation hit the room like thunder. Kun turned to run, panic overtaking him, but the front doors swung open again, and this time it wasn't a lawyer. Two federal agents stepped inside, badges raised. "Robert Kun," one announced, "you are under arrest for workplace discrimination, falsification of financial records, and obstruction of justice." Kun froze as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Employees watched silently, some relieved, some overwhelmed, some close to tears. As the agents led him out the door, his eyes darted toward Keisha, filled with a hatred that no longer held any power. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply stood tall, steady, unbroken. The truth had finally spoken for her, and this time, the world listened. 3 months changed everything. The restaurant that had once felt heavy with fear now breathed like a living thing finally set free. The morning sun cast warm light through the windows as employees moved with an energy David had never seen before, laughing, talking, proud of the work they did. At the center of it all stood Keisha, dressed not in a faded prep apron, but in a crisp white chef's coat embroidered with her new title, ****head chef****. She moved through the kitchen with authority and grace, checking sauces, tasting dishes, adjusting seasonings with a single decisive motion. The staff watched her with admiration, not because of the title, but because she had earned it through storms most people would never survive. Every step she took seemed to echo with the message that resilience could rebuild anything, even a place poisoned by years of corruption. David stood by the doorway, observing the kitchen transformation with quiet pride. The culture that had once driven people away now drew them in. Turnover had dropped so sharply that HR had called to double-check the numbers. Sales were up. Customers came not just for the food, but for the feeling of warmth and welcome that now filled the dining room. Online reviews overflowed with phrases like "finally treated with respect," "wonderful staff," and "best food this place has ever had." Keisha's influence wasn't loud or demanding. It was consistent. She held her team accountable with fairness, taught them with patience, and inspired them simply by being who she was, a woman who refused to be broken. Marcus visited often. now officially hired as the chain's diversity and workplace culture consultant. He walked through the restaurant this morning with a tablet in hand, reviewing new training programs and employee feedback. "You've built something strong here," he told David as they stood watching Keisha lead a quick morning briefing. "But she's the backbone. Remove her, and this whole transformation collapses." David didn't disagree. He'd seen the staff's confidence grow under her leadership, their fear replaced with trust, their silence replaced with voices that finally felt heard. Marcus had developed new policies, clearer protections, reporting procedures, mandatory training ensuring no manager would ever again manipulate or destroy an employee's career the way Kun had. Kun, now sitting in a federal prison cell hundreds of miles away, had been sentenced to 8 years after the investigations revealed everything: discrimination, financial fraud, falsified records, retaliation, and obstruction. His fall was swift and public. The industry closed its doors on him, his reputation collapsing like a structure built on lies. The news coverage had been relentless, and for the first time in a long time, employees across the chain saw proof that the system could hold people accountable no matter their position. But the story didn't end with Kun's punishment. It blossomed with Keisha's rebirth. She had started a mentoring program for young chefs, both inside the restaurant and in the community. Every Wednesday morning, she held free workshops in the kitchen, teaching knife skills, flavor pairing, and menu development to teenagers who came from neighborhoods often overlooked by culinary schools. She moved among them with gentle firmness, calling out mistakes, celebrating progress, and pushing each student to see potential they didn't know they had. Many of them looked at her the way she once looked at the chef she admired, except she stood taller, because her knowledge wasn't just technical, it was earned through survival. One afternoon, David watched her guide a shy 16-year-old girl through making a perfect reduction sauce. The girl's hands trembled, but Keisha stood beside her, steady and encouraging. "Courage isn't loud," she told her. "It's steady hands in a hot kitchen. It's trying again when the first batch burns. That's how chefs are made." The girl smiled, a small, bright smile that hinted at a future transformed. It was in moments like these that David understood the full extent of Keisha's impact. She wasn't just cooking, she was rewriting the story of what this restaurant could be. Later that week, after the dinner rush ended, David sat with Keisha in the quiet dining room. The tables were spotless, the lights dimmed, and the scent of roasted herbs lingered in the air. He looked at her with genuine admiration. "You rebuilt this place," he said simply. "Not me. Not corporate. You." Keisha didn't look away. She accepted the words, not with pride but with certainty. "I didn't rebuild it alone," she replied. "Everyone here wanted something better. I just gave them permission to believe it was possible." David nodded slowly. "But you showed us how." She leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. "Justice isn't just punishment," she said. "It's creating something strong enough that no one like Kun can ever break it again." Her voice held a softness that carried more power than anger ever could. "This place isn't perfect. It never will be. But now it's honest. And that's enough." The lights flickered gently above them, casting warm reflections across the empty tables. The restaurant, that once felt suffocating, was now filled with hope, purpose, and quiet triumph. Keisha's journey had wound through betrayal, injustice, and ruin, but she had risen, reclaimed her craft, and rebuilt a community that believed in her. And in doing so, she became the story the restaurant would carry forward, proof that strength grows in silence. Justice can be loud when needed, and rebuilding is possible when someone refuses to give up, no matter how deep the fall.